I watched my children argue over my belongings using papers they claimed I'd signed. The pen strokes were perfect. Their mistake was assuming I'd die before I read them. I answered with proof on paper and consequences in court. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am 71 years old, a grandfather of 4, and for 50 of those years I have pressed letters into paper. The smell of oil and ink is the smell of my life. My shop sits on the edge of our good-sized Midwestern town, where Main Street gives up trying to be modern and sags back into angled parking and fading awnings. I inherited the press from my father, who got it from a retired newspaper man. I taught myself to repair its spindly bones and taught paying customers to care again about paper, the thickness, the tooth, the understory of a watermark you can only see when the afternoon sun cuts through. When you work with documents every day, you learn the language that paper speaks. It is not just fonts or edge cuts or ink spread. It is the rhythm of signatures, the way a hand moves when it is rushed or when it tries too hard to be exact. I never thought those little skills would save me from my own children. My children are 3, Michael, my oldest, a man who sells property that he never touches with his own hands, Laura, my daughter, a school counselor who knows everyone's secrets, and Jamie, my youngest, a sweet talker who churned through ventures like Spoons Through Soup, podcasts, Kraft Pickles, a swimsuit brand that lasted 1 season. They are all decent in their own ways. They were raised on church suppers and summer fairs and a father who was home every night because the press sang only when I stood beside it. I am not rich, not by any famous measure. But the press is valuable, and so is the archive, 2 rooms behind a locked door, climate-controlled, with the shelves my father built and the gray boxes I can label blindfolded. Inside are county maps from the 1870s, engraved plates for a railroad bond that the city museum still asks to borrow, marriage licenses that never got filed because the courthouse flooded in 1922 and someone stashed them in a trunk. I bought estates. I collected the paper that slips through the cracks. There is money in that, if you know who wants what. There is also something better than money, proof that we were here. Last winter I got pneumonia. I spent 4 nights in the hospital, then 6 weeks walking the long hallway from my chair to the kitchen table. It is not melodramatic to say that something changed in my children's eyes during those weeks. It was not a look of pity. It was calculation, as if a timer had started. The first strange thing arrived in the mail, 2 envelopes from the same law office. Inside the first was a cheerful newsletter about planning for tomorrow today. Inside the second was a cover letter and a packet of forms, a power of attorney, a living will, and an amendment to my trust. The cover letter said, "As per your phone conversation, enclosed please find the documents we discussed." There was a business card held by a paperclip. I do not throw away paperclips, I keep them in an old coffee tin, a habit learned in a time when you saved anything you could use twice. I set the packet aside. My hands were hot and clumsy from the steroids, but my mind was clear. I had not called that law office. My friend Doug is a notary who stops by the shop on Fridays for a cup of coffee and whatever mail I have set aside for him to notarize. He retired from policing, but he never lost the habit of looking at people's hands, at their placid thumbs gliding over phones, at how they stand on the balls of their feet when they want to flee. I asked him to come by that day. He came in a Carhartt jacket and a grin. He read the cover letter and frowned. "We notarize papers," he said, "but we do not notarize stories. The story here says you called them. Did you?" "I did not," I said. He pulled the notary logbook from his bag. He keeps everything. He showed me a stamped entry with my name from 2 weeks earlier. Not his stamp. Someone else's. The entry claimed I had appeared before a notary in a neighboring county to sign a springing power of attorney that activated upon a doctor's note of diminished capacity. I looked at the date and understood the cruelty of the timing. It was the day after I had left the hospital, when my voice still rasped and the only thing I wanted was broth. The notary's name belonged to a woman whose stamp I had seen on loan documents that came through the shop when a real estate office ordered their packages on custom paper. She was young and efficient. Her signature was a hooked loop that looked like a treble clef. I called the law office. The receptionist said, politely, that she could not confirm or deny a client identity over the phone. I asked to leave a message for the attorney whose card I had. I left my number. In the second before I hung up, I asked, casually, whether they had received any calls from a man named Michael with my surname. She hesitated. Then she said, "We are not permitted to say." The way she said it told me that yes, they had. I did not call my children. I sat with the packet and thought about my father at the kitchen table the year he fell off the ladder and broke the bones that never properly healed. My sister and I were in our 30s then, full of advice and not much sense. He had looked at us and said, "Do not draw the map for me. Tell me where you think the bend in the river is." He meant, I will navigate my own life. You may warn me of the rocks. You may not take the wheel. That night, in bed, I listened to the house creak and felt the familiar ache of being alive, of lungs that had fought for breath and found it. I decided I would draw the map now. I would chart the rocks and the sandbars and set a marker where the bend would tempt anyone lazy to cut across. 4 days later, Laura brought over soup and a neat stack of forms. "Michael says you got the packet," she said. "We are worried about you." "Are you?" I said, and I pressed my thumb hard into the table so that the print would blur. "Dad," she said gently, "you have built something beautiful. But you are 71. The shop needs a plan. Jamie has some ideas about pivoting toward custom wedding packages, and..." She stopped because I had picked up the amendment. It appointed Michael as the trustee of my living trust in the event that I was incapacitated. It defined incapacitated as any physician's determination that I could no longer manage my finances. I read the paragraph again. The language was tidy. It was not wrong, as a concept. It was only wrong in whose idea it had been and when. "I have a plan," I said. "It is simple. The plan is that I will remain alive. And I will remain the trustee until I decide otherwise." She smiled the way people do when they do not disagree but they will proceed as if they were not told no. "Just think about it," she said. She left. I called Doug. We went to lunch like we were going to confession. He asked for stiff coffee and I asked for the check in advance. "I think you involved the recorder," he said. "And the forensic." "I think I set bait," I said. We did both. The recorder's office is staffed by women who have known me since I printed the posters for their cousins' weddings. They know the exact noise my truck makes when it backs into the spot behind their building because I often bring them donuts when it drizzles. I asked to speak to Ruth, the chief deputy, the one who stares at deeds like they are poems and finds the line breaks everyone else misses. I told her some of the story. Not all. She took notes. She entered a watch in the system, which is a glorified star in the margin but it makes the clerks look twice when anything with my name comes across. She told me she would email the investigator who handles notary complaints. She told me that stories like mine do not end quickly, and that the part that hurts most is the part where people you love think they are doing you a favor by taking what they want. That afternoon I called a forensic document examiner in the city. Her name was Eliza. Her voice crackled in my ear like paper being folded along an old crease. She asked for scans. I told her I would bring originals. She said good. That night I stayed late at the shop. I opened the locked door to the archive and walked the rows, past the boxes and the shelves of little metal clichés, tiny plates of reversed images that had once made small-town letterheads proud. The heater ticked. The light bulbs hummed. I wondered if there had ever been a time in history when a father did not have to worry that his children would skim from him before he stopped moving. I sat at the big work table and wrote a letter by hand to a law office in a different county, one that my friend the retired judge always praised for their clean files and their habit of asking hard questions. In my letter, I asked whether they would do me the favor of drafting a decoy amendment. The amendment would appoint Laura as my successor trustee. It would add a generous bequest to Jamie to fund a new venture. It would be printed on paper that I would supply, with a watermark that I could trace back to my own shelves. It would read, plainly, "This document supersedes all prior amendments upon my death and upon no earlier condition." It would have a signature line. It would have no signature. The law office would place it in their file. The cover letter would say, "As per your call, enclosed is the draft you requested." There would be no phone call, only my letter and their letter in return. How would my children get it? That part was easy. I would leave the file tab open on my desk when Laura came with soup next time. The tab would have the name of the law office, and she would do what she could never stop herself from doing, which is to call and ask. I am not proud of that. But pride is for parades. This was a siege. The next morning, a man in a suit appeared at my shop before I opened. He rapped on the glass and held up his business card against the pane. He was the attorney from the first law office, the one whose card had been paperclipped to the packet. He came in and wiped his shoes so carefully on the mat that I wondered if he had practiced looking conscientious. "I hear there is confusion," he said. I wanted to clarify. "I did not call you," I said. "That is the only clarification you need." He nodded. "Family members can initiate planning, sir. They can pay for it. You are the client. If you sign nothing, nothing moves. We are not villains." I believed him. He was not a villain. He was a vendor. It is a different species of danger. "I will keep my trustee position," I said. "Thank you for checking on me." He left. I waited until the red of his tail lights disappeared and then I walked to the coffee tin where I had put the paperclip. I took it out and held it under the light. It was bent at one angle, a little more open than I would have bent it. It left a faint rust mark on the cover letter where it had sat for a week. Nothing speaks as truthfully as a stain. When the decoy documents arrived, printed on my paper, I took them to the shop's back room and left the door ajar. I opened my laptop. I typed a note to myself that said, plainly, that I had not yet signed the decoy amendment, that it was a draft, that if I were found to have signed such a document at any time before my death, it would be a forgery. I saved the note to the desktop. I renamed the file 3 times with ordinary names until it was called Old Tax Receipts 2016. Then I printed it and put it in an envelope marked Shop Expenses, and slid it into the file beside the decoy. I did not plan to catch my children with a single trick. I planned to slow them down in every hallway until they had to run in order to keep the lie moving. The lie did not wait long to be tested. A week later, my grandson Ben played tuba at an assembly. He is 12, a good boy who thinks a tuba makes the sound of a barge finding itself very funny. Laura saved me a seat in the second row. She smiled at me, smoothed my sleeve, and said she would be right back. When she returned, she had a man with her, one of the assistant principals. He had a clipboard. He asked if I might sign a visitor policy update because the district appreciates your attendance, and I took the clipboard and looked down at a page attached with a paperclip. It was my decoy amendment. The assistant principal's finger pointed at the bottom of the page, at a tab stuck there with a fluorescent arrow. He spoke in the half-whisper people use when they do not want to cause a scene in a school gym. "Just sign and date for receipt," he said. I moved like a man who had aged 10 years. I took the paperclip off and slid it into my pocket. I looked at the page behind the decoy, a genuine school form about visitor policies. It was an old trick, a good one, a real page on top, a dangerous one below. I asked for signature on the line that would bind the one beneath. I said, "No, thank you," and I stood up and walked out. In the hallway, children in colorful t-shirts scurried past with instruments. I leaned against the trophy case and dialed Doug. I told him to meet me at the shop. Then I stood there and watched a girl with a clarinet salute me with her reed like I had just presented her with a ribbon. Back at the shop, I put the decoy and the school form on my table, side by side. The fluorescent arrow tab was clean. No fingerprints. The sticky edge was smudged with someone's lotion. The hole where the paperclip had been was fresh. Carry something in your pocket and the clip will rub, the hole will fray, the rust will leave a little amber tear. Here, the hole was still crisp. "Laura tried to get you to sign," Doug said. He said it like he was stating the time of day. "I do not know what Laura did," I said. But I knew. We took the pages to Eliza, the forensic, with the air and gait of men walking a fragile glass bowl across an icy sidewalk. Her office smelled faintly of toner. She had a microscope that made the paper's surface look like hills. She showed us the watermark glowing in the decoy. I had designed it, a tiny, hidden initial at the tail of a bird's wing. She smiled. "This is your paper," she said, "and it is your watermark and your bird. But the toner on this paragraph is different from the rest." She pointed to the line that read, "This document supersedes all prior amendments upon my death and upon no earlier condition." She took a photo. She explained that the edges of the toner here were sharper, as if printed later by a different machine. In the corner of the page there was a faint ghost of a DocuSign envelope ID, then on top of it a keyword typed in with a different kerning, the letters rubbing up against one another in an uneven embrace. "They are practicing," she said. "They are testing what they can get past you. They will try again." "They will," I said. And I knew how. At home that night I called my doctor. I told him what I planned. He sighed and mumbled something about not being paid to referee families, then agreed. The next day I sat in my doctor's office and completed a cognitive evaluation. It is a battery of tests that humble you in big and small ways. Draw a clock with the hands at 10 past 11, remember a list of words, repeat numbers backward, explain how two concepts are alike and how they are not. The doctor looked me in the eye and said, crisply, that I was mentally sound. He signed a letter that he would send to my file and to me. I took that letter and drove to the urgent care where a physician's assistant I had met once before worked. I asked politely whether I could see her. She came out with eyes like chips of ice. Her name tag dipped beneath a sweater with holiday snowmen on it. When she recognized me, something flickered across her face. In that flicker I saw a memory. Months earlier, Jamie had introduced her to me at the diner. She had laughed too loudly and asked too many questions about the value of all that old paper. She had called me Mr. Ink. If you want to know who will help break a rule, watch who giggles at the wrong time. I asked if she had, by chance, evaluated me during my illness or after. No, she said. Did you write a letter about my capacity? No, she said. Then she said, I do not know, and the hall monitors inside her eyes went on full alert. I said, thank you, and I left. If she had not written the letter, someone had used someone else's signature. Or someone had written it and did not want to say so in a hallway with people listening. I went home and drafted a brief affidavit. I swore that any letter declaring me incapacitated would be a forgery unless signed by my primary care physician whose name was on the page, that I had never sought or authorized such a letter from any other clinician. I had Doug notarize it. I took it to the recorder. I paid $30. They stamped it. The stamp sang like a coal on snow. A week later, the roof on my shop began to leak. It was not the roof's fault. The water came from a pipe that burst in the upstairs office. It burst precisely at the moment Laura and Michael were both there, along with Jamie, to help. I had asked them to come because I planned a fire drill of my own. I had salted the upstairs with decoy folders and real ones. I had placed a tray by the window with 3 envelopes that contained a list of the archive's most valuable items, a letter addressed to my attorney with a post-it note that said, do not send yet. Wait for phone call, and a single-page last will and testament that left everything, in free and clear title, to the County Historical Society. The will was dated in 1998. My true will was elsewhere, and current. The 1998 will was bait. It was on a paper with a tiny flaw near the lower right margin, a pinprick from when a staple once sat there and was removed. I wanted to see if that pinprick would appear in copies that went anywhere else. When the pipe burst, Laura grabbed towels. Michael grabbed a box. Jamie yelled, I got it, and ran up the stairs to get my files. He came down with the tray. The water spotted his shirt. He tried to smile. We piled the papers on the big table. I took the 3 envelopes from the tray and set them aside. Then I looked at my children and said, if you want to help, go home. They looked wounded. They looked like vicars in a storm. They left. I put the envelopes in my safe. That night my friend Ruth from the recorder's office called my home phone, the one with the ringer that sounds like a tiny hammer hitting a tin cup. She said, your name came through for a notice of trustee change on a property in your trust, your shop. The new trustee is your son. I said, please do not file it. She said, we did not. The notary seal bled through. It was too fresh. She paused. I thought you should know that it came by courier and that it smelled like a citrus candle. Jamie's girlfriend sells candles that smell like citrus. I would know that cloying note anywhere. The next day I drove to the courthouse with Doug. We turned into the stale air of the clerk's counter and asked to see the notary complaint investigator. He came out with a tired expression and a legal pad. I told him the story, the parts one could prove, the parts one could not. He did not look surprised. He said, if there is a forged physician letter in this, the state gets interested. Good, I said. It was the first time I let myself feel any version of anger besides sorrow. Michael called that night. He did not say hello. He said, Dad, do you know what you're doing? The way the shop is structured, if you die tomorrow, we will be stuck in probate for a year. Taxes will eat the archive. It is not just your money we are talking about. It is your legacy. Do not use that word, son, I said. Legacy is what the living use when they want to carve the dead. He hung up. Laura texted me with a string of sentences that read as compassion and felt like marching orders. Jamie sent a link to an online platform where, he said, we could handle the paperwork cleanly. He asked for my email and a good time to hop on a call. I did not answer any of them. My plan required silence from me. It required that I be what they were already treating me as, a man to be managed. Meanwhile, I kept busy. I met with Eliza and showed her a scan I had been sent by a paralegal, who did not sign her name, a scan of a letter I had requested from an urgent care physician assistant naming me unfit to manage my finances. Eliza ran her scope across the signature and found what she always finds, a rhythm missing, a tremble where a hand had tried to draw courage. It was not the assistant's signature. It was a careful trace, a lamp held up to a window with a pen working down like a man digging. We gave the scan to the investigator. The investigator asked for the assistant's cooperation. She provided a sample signature. It did not match. The investigator got busy in a new way. The trap I had baited with the decoy amendment was almost ready to spring. I prepared the final piece. In the archive, behind a false back in a shelf, I kept a ledger from 1911 that logged all kinds of small transactions in town, a barrel sold, a horse borrowed, a debt forgiven. At the back of the ledger, on a blank page, my father had once practiced his signature for no reason except the comfort of making a mark. Years ago, when we first rewrote my will and trust, the attorney suggested I avoid any signatures on anything that might be repurposed by a fool. I had followed his advice. But here was my father's name in 100 different sizes, charming and painfully human. I took a photograph of that page, printed it, and put it in an envelope labeled bold signatures. I set the envelope inside a box that was otherwise filled with bank statements from a time when interest rates were high and my children were small. I placed the box in a spot where a hurried searcher would find it. 3 days later, I pretended to doze in the big chair in the shop's front office while Jamie and Laura restocked envelopes. I heard the soft sound of a drawer opening and the box sliding. I heard a small intake of breath when the envelope was found. Jamie said, "Score," in a whisper he thought people use in movies. My stomach turned like a washing machine that had been overloaded with wet towels. That night, copies of documents bounced around the internet like stones skipped on a pond. The next day, the recorder's office received a new attempted filing, an amendment to my trust appointing Laura my successor trustee, effective immediately due to the decline of the current trustee, with an attached physician letter. There was also a transfer document for the shop that would allow a new trustee to sign a long-term lease with a wholesale stationery supplier that I knew to be Jamie's new company. The attestation page had my signature, copied from my father's practice page, mashed into a shape that nearly fooled a heart that wanted to trust. Ruth rejected the filing. She checked the affidavit I had placed and put a hold on anything bearing my name that did not match a list of authorized law offices. She called the investigator. The investigator called a judge. The judge called the assistant district attorney because a forged physician letter in a case of elder financial abuse will bring a law office down on you faster than a storm. They obtained a warrant for devices, printers, stamps, and seals. The warrant was executed on a Thursday morning. They found an embossing seal in Jamie's desk with the name of a notary who had had her stamp stolen last summer and never reported it. They found 3 sheets of my watermark paper in Laura's file cabinet. They found practice pages of my signature. They found the citrus candles, which is not a crime, but for me it will always be evidence. For a time, this should have made me feel triumphant. It did not. It felt like standing at my own funeral watching my children argue over the casket. I could name the moment when Michael turned away from caution and toward audacity. It was the minute he realized Ruth had rejected the first filing and believed that persistence would force success, that the government was a machine that stamped whatever was fed into it if you shoved hard enough. He learned wrong. The assistant district attorney, a man in his 30s who had the solemn face of a choir boy who had seen things, asked me what I wanted. Charges? Restitution? Mediation? I told him I wanted the truth made public in a way that could not be buried under holiday photos and normal family noise. He said, "The truth is slow." I said, "So is a press. But once it sets, it is ink and not rumor." We arranged a meeting in a conference room at the courthouse. Michael came with a lawyer who wore a suit with lapels too thin. Laura came with eyes rimmed red and a tissue that never fluffed. Jamie came with the citrus clinging to his coat. My oldest granddaughter, who is 16 and knows everything in the way that people do when they are good at school and bad at lying, sat in the hall outside and frowned at her phone. The assistant district attorney laid out the evidence, the forged letter, the stolen stamp, the attempt to change trusteeships and titles while I was alive and lucid. The law speaks politely. It called it elder financial exploitation and forgery in the third degree and conspiracy. That word, conspiracy, feels grandiose until you are on a thin carpet in a government building and someone is cataloging the ways your children work together to take what you did not give. Michael's lawyer tried to interject. He said his client was concerned about my health and had acted out of love. Love, I said, does not hide. Laura cried as if the tears were both apology and defense. Jamie stared at the table as if it might flip itself and become a stage where he could sell better versions of himself. The assistant district attorney left the room. He returned with a folder. He said the state would offer a plea if there was an admission and restitution. He looked at me and asked whether I would like to propose conditions. I will, I said. I propose that Michael and Laura and Jamie sign sworn statements detailing their involvement, including all steps and all helpers, and that those statements be filed in the case file and also given to the recorder's office and, by my request, to the County Historical Society. I propose that all assets they intended to transfer be returned. I propose that they pay the costs incurred by the recorder's office and the investigator and the forensic, and that those payments be documented in a place where public record can make a clean, permanent note of who should not be trusted with someone else's signature. And then, the assistant district attorney said. What do you want then? I want to rewrite my will, I said. And I have. I had changed it the week before. I had redirected the bulk of the archive to a trust in my grandchildren's names with a board that included the museum's curator and my friend Ruth and my doctor. The shop would continue as a charitable trust with me as executive director until I stepped down, and then the board would choose someone who had ink in their veins. My children would each get a stipend, enough to pay for therapy and some years of rent. They would be barred from serving on the trust's board for 10 years. They would not receive $1 more unless they completed an ethics course offered by the community college and performed 200 hours of service, real service, not ribbon cuttings, at the free legal clinic that helps people with guardianships and house deeds in our county. Michael's lawyer made a sound like a man scoffing at a proposal that asked him to eat dirt. The assistant district attorney did not scoff. He looked at me and then at my children and said, "He is offering you an exit from a longer fall. Take it." We stood in a corridor after, my children and I, like a portrait someone had cut out of a frame and left in the wind. Laura whispered, "I am sorry, Dad." I believed her. She would always be sorry. She would also always reach if she could see a reason why she should be the hand that sorted the pile. Michael said nothing to me, only to his phone. Jamie tried to meet my eye and failed. I went home and took a shower as warm as the steam would give. I sat in my chair and listened to the house settle around me. I thought about forgiveness. Some people expect forgiveness to be a switch. It is actually a series of small choices, like lifting a tight block and setting it in place, one letter, one space at a time, to make words that can be read. If you skip a space, if you insert a letter where it should not be, the sense is ruined. I would not cheat. I would set each piece in its slot and I would leave the blank where it belonged. In the weeks that followed, the plea was negotiated. The assistant district attorney did not push for jail because the state prefers restitution, not retribution, when paper is the weapon. There were fines and service. There was a court date where the judge looked over her glasses and said words that hung in the air like a verdict and also like a parent's last warning. My children signed statements. They named names. They described how they had learned about my records, how they had thought they could weave around the parts of the law that did not suit them. I learned, painfully, that it was Michael who had found my father's signature practice page and thought it a library for theft. I learned that Laura had adapted the visitor form trick from something she had seen at a training about student privacy, which hurt so much that I had to sit in my truck after the hearing and grip the steering wheel until the skin on my knuckles whitened. I learned that Jamie, poor Jamie, who wanted a brand, not a life, had paid cash for a stamp from a woman at a flea market stall. "It is not what it looks like," he had said to her. She had said, "It is always what it looks like." In that time, I ran the shop like a ship. Paper came in, paper went out. I printed a broadside of a poem my father loved, about work and honesty and hands that could not be bought. People came into the shop and touched the broadsides and said nice things about ink. One afternoon, Ben came by from school with his tuba case like a suitcase, and he watched the press cycle and asked if he could pull a sheet. I said yes. He did it like he was lifting a bird to the sky. The sheet caught the light. It was the right weight. It had the watermark you could not see until you held it up. "You made this paper," he said. "I did," I said. He looked at me and said, "Are you okay, Grandpa?" I said I was and I was not. He nodded like a man twice his age and then asked if he could eat a cookie. I said yes to that, too. It is possible to hold two truths and still offer a cookie. The day after the pleas were entered, Laura found me in the shop. She held the edge of the table as if the wood itself might keep her from collapsing. "I am not a villain," she said. "I thought I was protecting you. I was trying to make sure your things did not disappear into a museum that forgets your name." I nodded. "I do not need a museum to remember me," I said. "I need my children to remember that I am alive." She cried, a quieter crying. I asked if she would like to see the trust documents. She said yes. I showed her how the trust kept the shop alive and independent, how I had chosen people who would hold what I built without pawning it. I showed her the parts that allowed my grandchildren to be involved if they wanted, and the parts that kept my children at arm's length until they had learned to keep their hands steady near other people's signatures. "You will see me in the reading room, not in a will reading," I said. "You will see me printing, not dead." The last of my accounting was clean. I installed a camera in the archive. I changed the locks. A locksmith who sang under his breath swapped the pins and told me he had a son who wanted to be a drummer and that sometimes he worried the boy would steal time from him, though he laughed when he realized he was mixing metaphors. I smiled. People steal money, yes. They steal time, too. We give it to them when we think the price will be gratitude. In early spring, the museum put on an exhibit of local printers. They asked me to contribute a plate and a proof. I brought a plate that had made a 19th-century land transfer for a farm that would become a park. The proof bore a signature flourished like a banner. I wrote a little card for the display that said, "In the way you say a thing if you want it to stick in the world, that signatures are promises, between people, between past and future, between who you are when you make the mark and who you will be when you are called to answer for it." I did not mention my children. I did not mention anything that would turn the exhibit into something tabloid. I stood at the back and watched school groups file past and point at the press, at the old photographs, at the printer's devil in the black and white who wore a cap too big for his head. When it was my turn to speak, I used simple words. I said that paper can be a tool of kindness or a weapon. I said that the law listens when paper talks, and that it listens harder when paper lies. I said that if anyone in the room had a father who loved them, they should have him sign his name at the bottom of a note that said, "I am here." It would not be a binding document. It would be a piece of proof. After the exhibit, a woman approached me and said her mother had been taken in by a cousin who forged a quitclaim deed. I showed her how to file an affidavit. I gave her a card with my number on it. She said she did not have money for a lawyer. I said there are things in this county that still know how to help without asking if you can pay. She smiled like a person who had suddenly stopped drowning. The months shifted. Ben advanced in band. My oldest granddaughter drove away one Saturday morning for a practice test and came back with fast food and a confidence I had never seen on her face. I made the trust's board packets with a neatness that felt like prayer. Michael sent me 3 checks labeled restitution in cramped handwriting. I deposited them. Laura took the ethics course in the summer and wrote me a long letter at the end apologizing in detail for her part. She used phrases like abuse of trust, and I believed she had earned the words. Jamie did his service hours in fits and starts and then suddenly, as if something had turned in him, began to show up every Thursday to stand at the free legal clinic and stack intake forms and bring people water in paper cups. I do not know if this is redemption. I know it is motion toward it. One day, a customer came in with a box. Inside were 30 letters written between a husband and wife in 1945. The woman had died. The man, a darling ghost in suspenders, had asked his neighbor to see if there was a place that would hold the letters, not read them, not publish them, just keep them. I offered to store them until the neighbor found the right home. The box was light. I lifted it and felt, for the first time in a long while, that weight could be a blessing. That afternoon, a courier arrived with an envelope. It was from the school district. Inside was a letter from the assistant principal apologizing for any confusion caused by a volunteer who had tried to get papers signed at school. He included a new policy. All documents for signature would be checked by the office first. The letter was written on stock I had printed years ago. My watermark glowed when held up to the window. It felt like the county telling me, in its own way, that not all systems are asleep at the switch. In September, I hosted an open house at the shop for the trust's launch. The board stood in the back and ate cookies and tried not to look like a board. The museum curator gave a little speech. Ruth from the recorder's office shook hands with people who had never before thought that the recorder's office did anything except stamp and file. The judge who had scolded my children stopped by in plain clothes and hugged me with the simple sincerity of someone who had watched a messy family story try to devour itself and had seen it stop at the jaw. Near the end of the afternoon, Jamie approached me. He smelled like peppermint gum because he was trying to quit smoking and had the jaw to show for it. He said, "Dad, I know I do not get a vote. But I want to work here. I want to learn the press." I looked at him and saw the boy who used to sit in the shop and stack the little pieces of type into towers and knock them down. I saw the man who had tried to make a life out of pretending that the rules were for other people. I weighed things I had thought I could never weigh. You can volunteer, I said. You can sweep. You can watch. You can pull a sheet when I tell you to pull a sheet. And if I see your hands anywhere near the archive locks without me, you will not step foot in this building again. He nodded. It is hard to convey what a real nod looks like. Cover stories have nods that flicker. This one landed. He showed up 2 mornings later at 6 a.m., and swept with a concentration that made me suspect he had broken something inside himself that needed mending. I let him pull a sheet. He lifted the paper like a prayer. If you are reading this because you enjoy revenge stories, I want to tell you that the revenge is simple. It is not a plot twist where I send my children to prison or fake my own death and listen from behind a curtain while they reveal their schemes. The revenge is in the ink. It is in the public record that will bear their names alongside the words they do not want to be searchable. It is in the fact that when they tried to count my belongings while I was still breathing, I made them count the cost of their counting. It is in the line that now runs through the future in a steady hand: my grandchildren, not my children, will inherit the shop and the archive. The story of how that happened is on paper, not rumor, and that means it will outlast me. Last month, at Ben's next assembly, I arrived early. The assistant principal waved me through with an exaggerated flourish. Ben played his tuba as if the instrument had borrowed his lungs. After, in the parking lot, a man I did not recognize approached me. He said he was the brother of the physician assistant from the urgent care. He wanted to apologize for her. He said she had lost her job. He said she had taken cash from a young man with the promise of helping with paperwork, and had not understood that the paperwork would wrap around her like a snake. You do not need to apologize for her, I said. But I will tell you this. There is a difference between a mistake and a crime. She stood on the border and then stepped over. That was her choice. She will have to step back. He nodded. He said thank you for not ruining her life. I did not say that I had tried to ruin no one's life. That I had tried to set a boundary and light it so brightly that anyone who crossed would have to admit they had eyes. That Sunday, I took down the sign that had hung in the shop's window for 3 decades. It said simply, Harrigan Printing and Archive. I replaced it with, Harrigan Press and Public Record Trust. The letters were the same weight. The ink was the same black. The change was small and enormous. People stopped and read it and then came in and said, "What is a public record trust?" I told them that it was a place where paper told the truth about us even when we lied. A place where children could grow into people who learned that the right to someone else's signature is a line you do not cross knowing you cannot redraw it. My children do not come by together anymore. They come in fits and starts. Michael stands in a doorway and looks at the press like a man who tried to bulldoze a church and found his bulldozer stuck. He says little. He offers to take me to lunch. Sometimes I say yes. Laura brings soup without papers. She asks about ink. She leans against the table and talks about the school year and uses phrases like rebuilding trust, without irony. Jamie is there most mornings to sweep and learn to set type. He is slow. He is careful. He asks to see the archive and I say no, not yet, and he nods and does not push. Revenge stories, the real ones, do not end with fireworks. They end with a ledger balanced. My ledger is not fully balanced yet, but the columns add up now. I am alive. I am the trustee of my life. My grandchildren know how to lift a sheet. My name is signed where it should be and nowhere else. And if you pass by our shop on Main, right where the street gives up pretending to be new, you will hear, if you turn your head at the right moment, the steady, patient sound of truth setting in ink.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.